A Chicago filmmaker who is part of our ABC7 family is going behind the lens to honor her Albanian ancestors. Anisa Selenica is the director of A Journey to Freedom, the documentary tracing her family's history under communist rule in Albania and their courageous journey to freedom.
Some names vanish from history. Others are buried on purpose. My great-grandfather, Alush Leshanaku, stood against the communist regime in Albania. They executed him, then punished his children for the blood in their veins. My grandfather, Timur Selenica, was imprisoned, and still he ran. Across borders, across oceans. They tried to erase them, but I remember.
Oh my goodness. Anisa, a first-generation Albanian American, now lives in Chicago with her family. Their story of defiance, resilience, and survival is making Chicago proud. And as you just saw, such an impactful story and one that we need to tell here. Anisa joining us now to share more of her story and her hopes for this new film. Good morning. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to say it's amazing to be able to talk to you about this because you and I have talked about this many times in the past because you're part of the ABC7 Weekend Morning team. So tell us about the story, why you wanted to tell it, and what's gone into it so far.
So this has been a project since I was in high school, maybe even before that, like 5th grade when I started a family tree. And then all of a sudden I'm starting to realize that there was more pain and suffering through my family, like not your average like grandpa and grandma story. I'm like, what is going on? And so as my family was explaining their history, I was like, how come we never talk about this? And it's time to maybe shine some light on some struggles that get forgotten in history. So my great-grandfather, Alush, was against the communist regime. He was part of the resistance, and he was executed very early on, and then that tainted his children, and they weren't allowed to work or go to school. And so there was just a lot of resistance and stuff. So then my grandfather, who I never met any of these people, I just hear the stories from my family. So my grandfather on my dad's side, Timur, was in prison in Yugoslavia for about 8 years, then in a refugee camp in Italy, and he was just like, I'm done with barbed wire, and walked out and ended up in France.
Wow.
So my father was born over there, and his siblings,
So, I mean, so much goes into this. It's such an important subject matter, right? I mean, history is so alive every day. We're seeing, more pieces of our past being drudged up right in front of us. So when you think about what you've been able to learn from your family and what people can take away from this, what do you want people to take away?
I think it's just take the moment to really understand where your roots are from. I mean, honestly, when you kind of deep dive into like all this history and then you start to track everything and make timelines, you're like, this was a huge part of like world problems that we never talk about. Like Albania was isolated on a travel ban, atheist state, you're not allowed to practice anything, labor camps, prisons modeled after Russian gulags. Like no one would ever think that they would ever be in a situation like that. And then there's this small country, the size of Chicago, that many people, and they're isolated and gone. So just want people to take that away and just find your roots and track them back,
I also think it's so interesting and meaningful that you're able to take your personal story and the story of your family and really showcase a broader picture of world history too. And I mean, it's such a learning opportunity for people to see what actually went on.
Yes, absolutely. Because as I was traveling in Albania, I met a prisoner that was in prison for 40 years. He got out when he was 60. He's 90 now. I interviewed him, and he said he was like in those Russian gulag like prisons. And I'm like, how? And he's like, it's one of the worst things. He's like, it haunts me every day. So as I kept going, there was more prisoners. Like you would just talk to a neighbor, and if you hated the dictator, you're automatically just one day someone's coming in and taking you and throwing you in jail.
Wow.
And so, and then the labor camps, like my grandma, she was in a labor camp for a long time, like from 2 to like 6 years old, and her mom's just breaking rocks and no food, nothing, and she remembers that. I don't even remember anything that I like see at 2 years old, and she remembers all these horrors and stuff. So, and then her father was killed, and she saw his body and everything. So it was pretty hard for her as she grows up, and it still haunts her today. So these struggles.
Well, such an important story, one of tragedy, one of resilience,
Yes.
and then of course one of coming here to a new life and freedom and starting anew, period,
Yes.
right? Just starting anew. So we thank you so much for telling your story. I know there's a lot of work that still needs to be done with it. I know you're raising money. There's a GoFundMe. We've got a link to that as well.
Yes.
And you can find that on our website as well.
Yes, thank you so much.
No.